Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our Premier Solutions Engineer. Today, Dion is going to be going over, I think, a little bit more on the Viewbox control, but he's also here today to answer your questions. So go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Also joining us today is Sarah Mitchell, in charge of our documentation department, and she will be getting us answers to questions found in the documentation and posting them into the chat section of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. And there you are.
Awesome. I know. Well, now that everybody in the whole world is doing basically what we do virtually every week, it's crazy out there. I hope everybody
curve,
is.
Dion. Ahead of the curve we were.
I know. And also remember, our virtual developers conference is coming up later this year. So you make sure to go to alphasoftware.com, and there's a registration link on there. It's going to be a fabulous training event. We're producing some amazing stuff along with some great new features and capabilities that will be highlighted at the convention or the conference, excuse me. And we're very excited about that. And, we'll have our experts online, not only to do training, but also to answer questions, developers, et cetera, on all those questions you have and about the new features and capabilities there. And today is all about questions. In fact, I'm going to be finishing up the Viewbox series today with some of the fun stuff with a very fun demonstration. But along with that, we want to make sure that if you have any questions, you put them into your GoToWebinar question area, and we'll be monitoring those and going through them. Again, what really helps us understand what people want are the questions. And so the Viewbox came out of it, and we'll be doing some other really fun stuff in the next few weeks that are going to be based on customer questions. First, before I move any forward, I want to thank Chris and Sarah last week for taking the time to put together the updated iOS information in terms of building apps for iOS. That's obviously a very hot topic in the developer community, and they did a great job of getting the process started. And there's a lot of work that's being done to kind of smooth everything out, document, and make your life easier. So that we'll be having more news on that in the near future. But again, wanted to say thank you very much for them to take the time to do those or do the presentation demonstration and kind of fill us in on the status of those items there. Now, along with that, next week, we're going to, again, stay on the Viewbox today, but next week, we're going to talk about the TabbedUI replacement. We've gotten a lot of questions. We kind of covered that a while back.
Say, did you get any demand for that particular topic? I don't know, the TabbedUI. We've gotten so many emails about it. I think it's probably our most requested thing ever. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Wow. Yeah. So we've compiled all those, and what we're trying to do is put together a demonstration to kind of cover those questions that have come in. And so if you have any questions, get them in, guides@alphasoftware.com, and that will allow us to be prepared for next week and make sure we cover all the different topics people are interested in finding out. It's interesting that, what I'm realizing, the TabbedUI had a lot of really neat stuff under the covers that handled stuff for you. It was pre-built, but obviously there's certain limitations on the TabbedUI. But now you have to kind of figure out, well, how would I do that in a replacement when it was built in before? So a lot of fun, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And we look forward to having input and feedback from everybody on what they're interested in terms of, more information about the TabbedUI replacement. So today, what I want to do is continue our discussion about UI technology, and in particular, the Viewbox control. We've covered how to set up Viewboxes. We've talked about how to connect Viewboxes to databases, how to pass in arguments to filter data in Viewboxes. Then we talked about also using APIs as data sources for Viewboxes, which is very powerful because it allows you to not only connect to APIs that are out on the market through the Alpha server, but directly from your user interface. So there's a lot of really speed and enhancements. But one of the key things that I haven't covered as much, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, is the ability to style There we go. Thank you very much for your presence. And it was like a slow degradation. Usually it just goes off in la la land, but I kind of saw the audio going south. So with that, this Viewbox control allows you to really bring in the external styling to make your stuff look great. So I'm going to dive into it. I know we lost a few minutes there. So I'm going to jump over into my development environment. And so for people new, the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about history. So for this demonstration, I said, you know what? I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to say, let's say I want to have a designer. And so I went on, just to make it kind of interesting, went on to a site called Fiverr. And this is not an ad for Fiverr, by the way, but just to let you know, it's really fun. It's basically online freelancers, and it started out with everything is $5, but the pricing can vary depending on who people, what their skill sets and things like that. So I found a designer and I said, hey, you know what? I want to do a demonstration. I'd like you to put together a pricing table for me. And so they put together a pricing table. So where we were at is basically I went on to Fiverr and I asked them to deliver a pricing table. They delivered that. It was very inexpensive. I liked what it looked like. And I said, okay, I'm going to integrate that into Alpha. And so what they delivered to me was index, which is an HTML page, and along with that, some assets, which is the CSS and the other stuff that's necessary to make this thing work. And again, I really don't know how all that stuff is put together. It was more of just these elements were given to me. So now, as I mentioned, I'll go ahead and take a step back. I'm going to go ahead and integrate that into my Alpha environment. So I'm going to use a UX component. I'm going to go ahead and select a blank UX component. Again, we have a bunch of pre-defaulted. By the way, if you get like one, you can actually save your template or UXs as templates to reuse later on. So I'm going to go to controls. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put in a panel card. And then I'm going to go ahead and put inside that panel card a UX component. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm sorry, not a UX, but a Viewbox. So I'll go Viewbox pricing. And I'll go ahead and save this for Viewbox pricing. Okay. So right now I have no content in the Viewbox pricing. So what we'd like to do next is go ahead and populate that. So the way we do it is twofold. There's there's actually three aspects that need to be done. Aspect number one is that we're going to have a Viewbox layout with the HTML. And potentially you could have CSS in here also. So I'm going to go back in to my deliverable. So I'm going into my deliverable here. And the first thing I'm going to do is look at this index. And I'm going to edit it with Notepad, which is just a off-the-shelf standard text editor. So as you can see, what I'm seeing here, move this over here, is just an HTML page. And it has a bunch of other stuff in there. But the important thing I want to do is, you'll notice we have a head section area. And in here, it has a set of scripts and other things like that. And then we have a body area, which actually has my actual content that I want to display the HTML from there. So let's first focus on the top header portion. So you'll notice in here that very important is that this individual used Bootstrap CSS. And you'll see that they're using a set of assets. So remember, when they delivered an assets folder, and in there were a set of folders here, and in there are, for instance, CSS, there's some Bootstrap, and my style information here. And all of this is needed for this to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this assets file here, I'm going to copy it, and then what I want to do is I'm going to go back into Alpha, and I'm going to go into my project folder. So the way I did that is this is my project folder. It's a shortcut. So this is where my project is there. And so this is where my UX and things like that. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure I have it. I'm just going to go ahead and paste that assets folder. I've done it already, but now that assets folder is inside of my project. And that's important because when we do the HTML and stuff, it's going to be looking in my project. If it was back out on my desktop over here, then it wouldn't find it. So step number one is that if they provide you some assets, which they do in this particular situation, let me go over here, then you need to bring those into it. Now that I have those in there, I need to go back into my UX and do something very important. So what I need to do is let the UX know where to find that information. So if I go back into my HTML right here, you'll notice that in the head section tab, you'll see that it's got three things: a link to the Bootstrap, a link to a font awesome, and a link to the style. And you'll notice it's inside that assets folder, inside a subfolder called CSS. Well, there are two ways to do this, but I'm going to show you the quick and dirty way. I'm just going to take this, copy this information. So I've copied that information in the head section tab. I'm not worried about this stuff. This is like if you have IE 9.0, then it throws it puts some other things to make it all work. I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about the assets that they have provided me. So I've copied those. I go into Alpha, I go into the UX, and I go to the properties. And I search for something called head section task. And you'll see in there that for my UX, there's an area called head section task. And it allows you to go in there, and I can actually insert that same code. And what this is essentially doing is the same thing is done here, is that when it produces that UX, it puts a head tag, because Alpha is really just generating a web page for you. And then anything I put in that little area will be put in there. So you'll notice I'm just copying it and putting it in here. Now that's method number one, and that's a quick and dirty way to do it. So now what will happen is when this web page is rendered, Alpha or the HTML and CSS knows where to go find its stuff. Now real quick, another method for you to do this is the following. So I can actually go into the properties here, go to CSS, and we have something called CSS linked files. And you could open up there, and instead of pasting it in there, you could grab this and say, okay, here's file number one, go back in here and put them in here. So they're equivalent. What happens here is it's just, we're telling how that A5W page where to get this information. So I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to leave it as the head section tags, but you could also do it in CSS linked files. Either way is perfectly acceptable for your scenario there. So step one, I looked at my deliverable. I grabbed my assets and put them inside my project so they're available. Step two, I looked at my page and I noticed, oh, for this page to work, the page needs to know about, or my HTML needs to know about that. So I just grabbed that, went into the properties and went to the head section tab, opened it up here and pasted it there. And again, you could also do it in the CSS linked. So now this thing is configured and ready to know about the HTML. So now I'm going to go back into my controls. I'm going to go to VB pricing, and I'm going to go here to Viewbox layout. This is where I put my HTML. So now I go in here, and I'm just going to grab the HTML that was given me. I'm going to copy all that in here. I'm going to copy that and go back in here, and I'm going to paste it here. So this is the HTML that they've given me here. And so you'll notice that, it's got the pricing information and everything there. So now, if I've done everything correctly, if I do my working preview, takes a moment to render. It's looking there, it's almost there, but you'll notice that I didn't set the Viewbox to consume the whole page. So let me go back in here. I'm going to go over here to fill container and do working preview. And now my Viewbox is in there. Now notice some of these things aren't looking properly. So there's a couple things we need to do. So part of that is working preview is not the most highest fidelity. So what I'm going to do is the following, is to kind of show you how this works, because I could do a live preview. So let's go ahead and do a full preview here. Show you like there. But there's, just something you need to know is that sometimes it's a little challenging inside the development environment to see the impact of all of your changes because it's using there. So you can see things there. So what I'm going to do to kind of show how this is working properly, I'm going to go ahead and save a page. and I'm going to call this pricing table. So basically that's just a page for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to publish everything to my local web root. And actually just open up that page when it's on the local web root. So I'm going to go here, go pricing, publish the local web root, and open up. So again, I find still there's some challenges around making it, work inside the working preview. But notice now I'm inside my browser, and all of the HTML and CSS is rendering properly, including, notice my little hover effect and everything else here. So just to make sure we're going through this step by step, I went into my Viewbox of pricing. I went to my layout. I pasted the HTML they gave me. I saved it. In this case, I created a page by just clicking Save Page and created a page. And then I published it to my local and did a refresh. And you can see that's what it looks there. Now, for instance, let's say we wanted to change it from private to something like super private. So I can go in there now, and any change I make here is going to work perfect. So let's go ahead and say super private instruction. And let's go ahead and save that and publish it. And if I go back to my browser and just do a refresh, you'll see it accepted that information. It just redisplayed the HTML. So the moral to this story is that when you bring it in, if you're in working preview, you're going to still see it render the content. But you notice it doesn't render everything perfectly. And there's just, working preview is more built for internal kind of stuff there. Even live preview, well, I can show you live. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and do this. One of the reasons why live preview is not working is the following. And Dave, should I take a quick detour on live preview? I think it'd be important to talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this is a detour, but it's a super important one. So as I mentioned before, working preview is pretty good, but you notice it shows my thing. And you're going to see that it still kind of works, but it just doesn't render everything perfectly from that standpoint. No problem. What we want to do is live preview gives a higher fidelity. And what live preview does is that when you click here, it asks you to do a full preview. And what it is doing is actually copying all the files to my local drive and running it in essentially as if it were in a web browser on the local drive. But you notice there's a problem here. It's not looking right. Well, this is the reason why. Remember, and this is very important, when we went into head section tags, we're referring to this information here. And if the web page can't find that, it can't render things properly. So what we need to do is the following. You remember at the very beginning when I said, okay, I'm going to take my assets file and I'm going to copy it in my project. So that's fine. When I run in live preview, what's actually happening, and let me go ahead and open up a new file browser here. There is a special location on your computer. So if I go to C A5 web root, and then you'll see there's something called live preview. So C A5 web root live preview. What happens is when I'm in alpha and I click this live preview, it actually publishes it to this little directory here and then presents it in the user interface. But notice what is missing here. I have my page in here. Like we go down here, where is it? Pricing type. Let's see. Oh, it's like a temporary page. Let's see. Where is that? It's like a pricing page. It's published there, but you'll notice in here, I don't have that assets folder. So for me to properly test this, all I have to do is copy this assets folder, manually put it into live preview. So now it's there. So now what happens is when I run live preview, if this works correctly, which it should, voila, it works. Very important concept. So what's interesting is when I click live preview, it didn't check or understand that dependency on that asset folder. I mean, technically it should take that asset folder as a dependency, but that's just a little nuance. So all I did was go into my copy assets into my live preview folder. And again, where you find it is C A5 web root live preview. And now that's in there, when I'm running in here, it knows where to get the asset information here. And that's a lot more convenient. I mean, there's certain times where I kind of like being able to do this. And so there's two ways to kind of debug this. One is you can use live preview. So let me go ahead and show you an example of that. Let's say I go into my controls here, and I go here, and I say I'm going to change that to the private instruction. So I click I save it, I do a live preview, and I'm going to see that change here. Now, alternatively, I could do the following is after I've got things set up, I can say awesome private instruction. I can then save it and publish it. And then I can go to my web browser and just hit refresh, and it will refresh that right here. So both of those are equivalent. Essentially, we're kind of doing the same thing, except Alpha is publishing it to that live preview folder and doing it from there. So I hope that was important for you to understand, is the reason we were not seeing the proper rendering of it in the live preview is that in the live preview folder, we were missing this asset folder. So step number one, if you're going to use live preview, is take any of those assets and copy them into your live preview folder so that they're available there. Thus, when you do your live preview, then it has everything it needs to render the interface correctly from there. So I guess that was a cool way to fail, is that it kind of allowed us to talk about what live preview has done there. So that's phase number. So now I've got a beautiful Viewbox. I can actually have some fun. You know, I need a background here, so I can go here to panel card number 1. I can go to the panel body style and pick a background color, and let's pick something like, you know, a little lighter or something like that. And if I do a live preview, you'll see that maybe now I have a little nicer background. Notice the nice little shadow effect that the designer added. I would never know how to do that. And then you have obviously still these nice, beautiful effects where you hover over it and you see what you're going to select from there. So that's phase one. It was a combination of first moving my assets into the project, that assets folder. Step 2, I identified in here any, excuse me, wrong page here. I identified any requirements in the header here. I put those either in the header section of the UX component or extracted it and put it in the CSS style. Then I extracted my HTML and put it in there. And that allowed me to move this now from the outside world into the alpha world. And what's important, we're going to go over next, is now that it's in the alpha world, now I can really unlock the magic of this thing and make it look beautiful from there. So again, that's step one. I'd like to take a step or a stop point and see if there's any questions about what I've shown so far, because now I'm going to show you how to make this data driven, where these rows right here are driven out of a data source instead of statically defined in my HTML. If you'll notice, I go here, you'll see that in here I've got these entries. Each one of these is an entry, and it shows how to do that from there. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn that over to and see if there's any questions on that. If not, then we'll move on to the next step.
There are a couple of questions, and if we could just start with a general one, which is always a good one, which is from a design perspective, what are the advantages of using the Viewbox over the list? I know you've gone over that before, but just reiterate that.
Okay, so very good question, and we really appreciate that. The Viewbox is a much lighter component. There's not much to it. It really is a small component. So it tends to run at a snappier speed, but it doesn't do as much as the list. The real determinator is that the list control has a large amount of built-in functionality to do editing of content. The Viewbox is more of a display-only technology. It is meant to take some data, some HTML and CSS, merge it, and show it to the person there. So you really can't edit data in a Viewbox, but a list control, the other aspect a list control buys you is that if you're doing an offline application, the list control will actually manage your data offline so you can edit, adjust it, and synchronize it to a back-end data source at that point. But again, the number one thing is that the Viewbox, because in the list control, you can use your own template. So you can use this same concept in a list control to basically use off-the-shelf HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, etc. to present the data. But it's a heavier component, so if you don't need all that editing and you're just doing presentation, go towards the Viewbox.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Now, the other question actually has to do with Fiverr. So the question is, can you explain what you asked the people at Fiverr to give you as a deliverable? Did you say, hey, can you give me back a web page, or can you make something that looks like this? And how did you what skill did you choose for that?
Gotcha. So what I did is, the first thing I did was just I went HTML, CSS. That shows me all the different people, and you'll see there are people who can do, you know, full websites, etc., whatever you happen to want to do from there. And then what you can do is just go through, and what I started out with there is I just kind of went into something and I said, you know, I wasn't looking for very much money. I think it just cost me $10. But I went in and I looked at some of their samples and said, you know, have they done something that looked like what I wanted? And I knew I wanted a pricing table. So in this case, I just kind of like already picked it a pricing table and looked for something that someone had done that was like a pricing table. And then I just looked at their design there and said, hey, you know, who has some pretty good talent at putting together designs of what they look like? And again, they'll give you little sample pictures of what they put together. So if I wanted something like that, they know how to lay out some kind of control on here from that standpoint there. And so I used a combination of, did I find something that they had done that looked familiar with what I wanted? And secondly, what was the price? But as you can see, $20 is I would take hours and hours and hours to try and create something like this. It would just be impossible for me almost to do it. So it's really a good deal there. But that was the process I went through to come in. So I found something that looked like a pricing table and said, okay, I want something that looks like that. And then they went off and built it, sent it to me within about, I think it took about a day and a half, and it was back.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
You got it.
And the other one is not related to Viewbox. Let me see what the other one is. That's it. I have a couple good questions to ask you later on, but if you want to continue on, you can.
Sure. Yeah, yep. I do want to definitely get to this. And so the next step is the following. I've got a static Viewbox, but I don't want it to be static. I actually want to drive this pricing table so that the name, the total, and the cost per class comes out of a data source. Now, today I'm going to use static JSON just because then I can give it to you. You can load it on your machine and be done with it. But reality is this would either be called from a web API or from a database. You know, I want to have this because then all I have to do is the next time I edit my database, when someone hits this page, it's going to refresh that data and they're going to get the most current data. Wonderful, wonderful capability in there. So what I did is the following, is the first I needed my data. So if we look here, my data consists of three elements: the class name, the total, and the cost per class. So for my demonstration, I created a little piece of JSON which included a set of class name, total, and cost per class. Now, what's kind of cool is that if you already have an existing database, you can use Alpha will automatically generate this JSON from a database table. So you don't have to do it. I just did it manually. It was very simple. And just to make sure people understand, JSON, if this is a JSON array, you'll notice that here's my first record, here's my second record, here's my third record. You'll notice my records are have a comma between them. And then all of my records have an open bracket, closed bracket. That basically says this is an array of JSON objects, and each one of these is JSON. And then each one of them consists of a class name, a total, and a cost per class. So I created this little content. And again, if you already have you can write a little Alpha script in about 2 minutes, have actually Alpha do it to generate this from a database table, and you're off to the races there. So now that I have my data here, I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to go in here to my Viewbox pricing. I'm going to go to the data source, and you'll notice when I first built this, I didn't specify that it's data driven. So now I'm going to click here, say data, And then it asked me, well, where am I going to get my data? And again, as I mentioned, if you just query a table that had that information in, Alpha will create that for you. And in fact, that's when there's a really cool technique where you can actually query it and then have Alpha turn it into a static set of JSON. It's pretty neat. But I'm just going to click here for static JSON since I already have that. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to paste it. Now, what I would like to do is I'm going to validate this to make sure I didn't do a paste error or something's wrong. So Alpha has that ability here. I can also view it in a JSON viewer, which is kind of cool. Click that, and you'll see that here's my JSON, and I can see it found 5 records, and here's the different record information. So it's almost, it actually looks at the JSON and kind of shows you what it looks like in from there. So this is the raw JSON, and this is the viewer that's analyzed it and said, oh, look, I found 6 records actually, and each record has some information that's associated with it. So now I have my data to it. Okay, oops, go ahead and just save that as an interim step. Now here is the fun part. So I'm going to go into my Viewbox layout, and this is where you have to kind of say, oh, okay, how is my HTML actually structured? Okay, so you'll see, and actually, you know what? I'm going to show it to you in my editor because it's actually a little easier to see in the editor here. So you can see that what's going on here, and this is again where you kind of have to then apply a little bit of trial and error, but you'll see that if we look at our rendered page, you have a title here and then sort of a header road. And the header road is private classes, total, and cost per class. So if we go in there, oh, this is the header row right here, which has that private classes total. And then you'll see that we have this class called pricing body. And what that is this area right here. So think of it as an invisible box underneath this header where these items are located inside. And if we go into here, you'll see that each one of these, and this just looks a little strange here, so I'll do that. You'll see that each one of your lines is this thing called Class P entry. And again, what Class P entry means, I have no idea. I just know that when the person built it, they built the styling for each of my rows here by creating something that said, oops, I keep jumping there, I apologize, this div class P entry kind of thing here. And you'll see that in there are 3 elements, the class name, this, the first price, and the second price. So now what I need to do is, what I want to actually have Alpha do is, I'm not going to sit there and type in all this stuff. So basically what I want it to do is take this here and iterate it over the number of times I have stuff in my data and substitute the value in there. So let's go into Alpha and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I only need one of these classes. So I'm going to delete these. I'm going to be very careful that I don't accidentally delete something I don't want to. So you'll see now I've deleted all of my rows except one. And this is my key thing, is I want to iterate through these rows. Now what I want to do is, when I iterate through those rows, I want to replace this text right here with some information in my JSON. Well, the nice thing is I can simply highlight where I want that text to be and go insert field, and here are my fields that are in my JSON. So in my case, class name. And you'll see then when this runs, it's going to substitute class name. Now I also want to put in my second field here, and it's going to be total, and then my last field, which is that last column, is cost per class. So you can see here is the class name, the total, and the cost per class. So what's going to happen is, when Alpha runs, it takes your JSON data, merges it with your HTML, and where it finds these little curly brackets, it does a substitution. Now, I'm not done yet, but I want to show you what happens next. So I'm just going to go ahead and great. That's great. I'm ready to go. It's going to work fabulous. So I go into working preview. Actually, let me go to live preview so we can actually see what it looks like there. And you're going to see something. It's not going to work correctly. You'll notice what it's doing, and this is very interesting, is that it's not iterating over each of those rows, it's actually iterating over my whole HTML because I have to tell it where I want to iterate it. So notice that it's spitting out dynamic information: intro class, each class, package of 5, etc. But what it's doing is it's not iterating over my rows, it's iterating over the total HTML. And that may be what you want. You may have a whole HTML and you have like a set of cards and you're showing those cards, then that works fine. The reason that occurs is that they're inside here. Let me go back into my item here, is that it's basically spitting out this one time for every row in my JSON data. What I need to do is tell it, you know what? All I want you to do is iterate this every time. And therefore, then what Alpha will do is it will spit this out, iterate through this, and spit there. Now, the way to do that is called a command directive. And again, this is just where it gets a little bit, you'll get used to this stuff here. So again, what I want to do is actually, I want it to spit out one of those each time. So I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to go that. So right here where I want it to start essentially the loop, I go to Insert, Command, and I find something called root, and I put it in there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go where I want it to end. I'm going to go right there, and I'm going to insert my command, and it's going to be end root. So you'll see I have an opening tag called root and end root. And I'll explain what the root means. It's kind of like, well, what the heck does that mean? It's kind of crazy. So, but now what will happen is, by the way, behind the scenes when I ran this, Alpha kind of put a root at the top level. So it kind of did that for me just kind of as a nice favor. I didn't have to put this information in there for it to work. So now what I should anticipate is that this information will spit out once. This will iterate through my data elements and it'll spit out once below there. So let's see if that works. Let's do a live preview. So it's going to take my JSON and check it out. Notice that it iterated through, instead of putting out a new page or a whole thing, it just iterated through these here. Now, let me prove that that actually worked. Notice my, let's call this package of 20. Let's say we don't offer that anymore. So I'm going to go into my data. I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to say a package of 200. It's a very expensive package. If you have to ask, you can't attend. And actually cost per class actually goes up. And anyway, so math is not on the thing for today. Now let me do my live preview. And you'll see that it merges that JSON right here. And now I'm getting that updated data. Now I did that in JSON, but if that was in a data table, it would have merely pulled out of the data table that information and merged it from there. So now I've taken a piece of static HTML and CSS and turned it into a dynamic one. And as you can see, I could do it through these lines. I could do it through the whole thing. It can get really fancy. In fact, if you have multiple data types. But I want to go back and spend just a few minutes here talking about this whole root thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my JSON. And you'll notice in here that we have, it's basically, we have an array of objects. And when it doesn't see a name for these array of objects, it calls basically this array root. And so when I put in that directive, it's saying iterate through all the things in my root. So when I go back to layout here, and I go here, this basically says, okay, when you see this little indicator here, go ahead and start iterating over the JSON objects in there. Now, the reason this is really powerful is, let's say you had a situation where you had 2 levels of data. So let me go back and show my data source here. You'll see we really only have 1 level of data, but maybe we had in the future, we could have a top level that says class name, and then there's a pricing set for each class. Well, what you can do, and we won't cover it today, is when you go into the layout, you can refer to the name of like the pricing table here, and then have the root at the top level spitting out a card for each class, and then a secondary set of data in your JSON, which is the basically the class prices that would iterate through there. So we can handle that hierarchical data where you can say have a top level, have a secondary level, have a third level. And that's what's really, really powerful, is that you may have a pretty complex set of information show on the screen. Well, it doesn't matter. Alpha will be able to handle it. So I know this root thing kind of sounds a little strange, and I had to kind of get my head around it. But the way to consider it is that if you look at your data, if there isn't like an actual designator in your data, then that data is considered root, and it will iterate through those items using this opening tag and your closing tag here. And you know, it takes a little trial and error, but you'll get very comfortable with it there. So I'm going to stop at this point, open it up for questions.
Excellent. So if we could just back it up right there. So let's imagine your data set for each one of those classes also had skills, you know, that you might be learning. Might be JavaScript, it might be database, and it could be any number of them in your data source. How would you refer to that skills
good point.
directory or child record? You don't use root because that's the top one. Is it like asterisk and then the child's name, or is it something else?
Yeah, so let's give that a try. I hadn't anticipated doing this, and actually that's a really good question. No, let me give people an option. I can either try and do it now, I've only got a little bit of time there, or I can do that and come back next week and actually show you how a 2-level. And what the 2-level would be is the following. As you'll notice, our live preview right here, I'd like to do it justice because I think this is a critical question about it. What it would be is that it would spit out each class, or each class group as a separate card, and then have within each class group a set of pricing records. So I would like to go ahead and do that and come back because I think it will be more powerful and effective. Plus, once I have a demo, I can send it out to people and they can see it. And so what you should see is you'll see this card repeated on the screen once for each top level record. And then under here, you'll see these iterate through the pricing for each of the sub. And we'll use a hierarchical JSON structure to do that. And in fact, I could probably even put it in a database table to show you how it can pull it from database. You know, we can have some fun with that. But I really would like to do justice to it because this root thing gets a little confusing.
Sure. So maybe after the TabbedUI stuff, which everyone is clamoring for.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll leave them hanging. So
all right, cool.
That sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So a couple. So a couple other questions though. So the first one has to do with. Well, actually, first of all, someone mentioned that. Oops. Let me clear that. Someone mentioned that they couldn't find last week's recording from YouTube, and I did realize that it wasn't posted. It should be up probably by tomorrow, so sorry about that. The next question has to do with a list control. And so the question is, can a list control be set up to not load data from the database until search criteria has been selected? And I can already imagine a scenario where you'd want to do that. You have a database which has a bazillion records in it, and maybe you have a mobile app and you don't want to pull them all back to the list control. You want to first pull back the subset and you want to wait for them to do it.
Correct. Yeah. So absolutely. Let me go ahead and create a new UX component, and I'll just put a list control in there real quick. And let's go ahead and set this up real quick. I'll just do a real quick demonstration where we go connection string to our north winds, select the customers table, and then we'll go ahead and, I got to tell which fields. Let's do a few of the fields real quick. Go to list layout, we'll put them all in there. Okay. Put a panel card around it, and we'll make that there. Okay. So as you can see, as the gentleman mentioned, is that when you do working preview, the list's natural behavior is to do an immediate call for data. So it immediately calls the information and loads up that list, which often is the behavior you want. You know, when someone sees, it's like a grid, you want to show the information there. but there may be situations where you want to delay that happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my list delay. I'm going to go to my list properties. So it's the third tab under list. And I'm going to scroll down and you'll see there are two options here. One is called delay render till visible. The other one is called delay render till explicit refresh. Now the visible is really cool. So let's say you had like 3 or 4 panel cards and you had 4 or 5, a list on each of those panel cards. You may want to pull up and show the first list, but not show the other ones until they're seen, because maybe some people never look at those. So you don't want to take that performance hit out of the gate where it's loading all these lists, when the reality is you only need one view at one time. But the other one, which I'll show you now, is something called delay render till explicit refresh. So I'm going to enable that. So now watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and do a working preview. And you'll see my list rendered, but it didn't pull any data. So my data is not there. Now I'm going to go into my panel header. I'm going to insert a button. I'm going to say refresh. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to add a new action. It's a list control action. And I'm going to say refresh data. And I'm going to point at my list delay. So now what I can do, when I do a working preview, you can see I don't have anything, but when I click refresh, it loads the list at that time. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do something else. I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and put in a text box here. And I'm going to call this filter. And the question was like, so that's just how you can control it using the delay render till visible, or not visible, but till refresh. But I'm going to go to list properties and I'm going to say it has a search part. And I'm going to go ahead and notice when I click search part, it adds a little tab up here. I'm going to go to search part. This allows me to define it. And I'm going to go here to company name. And I'm going to do my filter in here. Okay. Now notice something here. It says delay populate list till active search. Turn that on. Now I'm going to go back to my list, go to the list properties. I'm going to take off that delay render till explicit refresh, because right now it's being dictated by this from that standpoint here. Now there is an issue, is I need a button here to trigger that filter, because right now when you go working preview, you'll see first there's no records in here because I put that rule. But if I put in here, and let's say I want to change, alpha key or whatever, how do I get this to actually filter? Well, what I can do is there's a really cool feature in Alpha where I can go here to filter and get rid of that. And I'm going to go to filter, and then I'm going to come down here to define controls. And I'm going to scroll down until I find an area which are list search part buttons. Now I could create a button and go in and manually code those up, but Alpha will do it for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click list search part buttons. It shows me what lists are on the screen, and I'd like it to create a submit search and a clear search button for me, and click OK. So you'll notice that it generated those two buttons for me, and more importantly, it puts the JavaScript in those buttons to make it do what it wants to do. So in this case, it's clearing a search. So I didn't have to go around and try and find all the JavaScript. It just created these buttons for me. So now let's double check to make sure everything's working. So step number 1 is it should not render the list until so notice it's not rendering it, but now I'm going to put in, say, AL, click search, and notice now it has done that search and populated the list at that point in time. So I kind of wrap two things. One is that you can control when this is visible by either saying only show it when it's being refreshed. In the search functionality, you can tell it not to show until you click the search button to then show that information. Notice if I hit clear, it'll clear the filter, and notice it doesn't show the information in there and I would clear this, I'll show you how to do that. I would clear that field here. So let's see if there's anything with BER. Yep, there is one right there from that standpoint. when I clear the filter. Let me show you that real quick. But again, before I show the clear filter issue, it should clear out this field. You'll notice that, again, step one is I can refresh it and it will refresh the whole list. I can also tie it to my search. I'm going to go back into my list here, go to my search part, and go into my search part field map. And where is that? Which one is it? Oh, where is it? Maybe it's in the clear filter. It's in here where it'll actually also clear the field. Huh, I thought that was in the list part. I have to go investigate that. Did I populate? Actually, we can go in here. Nah, don't have to. I'll have to figure that out. I can actually, what I'm doing in there is that in this clear filter, I can also just manually go dialog.object.setValue. I can say control filter is equal to empty. And so I'm manually saying clear the filter on the list and clear the value out of the filter screen. I'll do working preview. Put in BER, click search. Did I break it? Must have broken it. Let me go back into my search button. It's all cracked. Yeah, I did break it. And make sure that my delay, yep. Now we'll do a working preview. Try it out here. So we'll go BER, search it, and then clear filter. You'll notice it cleared here, and I cleared out that field, ready for your next search criteria. Great question, thank you.
Yeah. So we have hit the end of our time, but I would like to sneak in one last question because it isn't terribly long. Sorry about that.
We'll call it those are quarantine rules.
Okay, one extra question. It says, so this person has an application which frequently has updates to documents that are stored in an S3 location. How can they ensure that the users are viewing the latest version of their document without having to have them clear their entire browsing history? I happen to know the answer to this.
Ooh, interesting. Well, I think the best way to do that, there's a trick. And what it has to do is when you open it in the browser, you attach a query string to it.
That's exactly it. That's what I was thinking too. Right. You attach. So I do that with images as well that get updated. So let's say you were requesting, my document.doc, right? But my document.doc had been cached already in the user's browser. What you'd want to do is say my document.doc ? And then some random number, maybe like a GUID or something like that. And then from your browser's point of view, it's never seen that request before. But from the server's point of view, it's just going to throw out that query string because it doesn't need it. So the browser thinks that it's new and the server isn't confused by it.
Right. So in this case, what I'm doing is I will go ahead and say here, and I'm going to say, convert this to text mode. So, oh no, that's a bad one on there. Let me try that again. So, let's go open Nate5W. And you say, you give it the page URL.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you can set arguments in here, say has variables. You can say, let's say a random is filled with one of your, actually, I think I can do this. Wait a second here. How I would do this just for fun is I would create another field in here that is, bottom line is, I'm sorry, I went way off track there. But when you open it, you just pass in a random query string. So then you're right, then the server says, oh, this is new, and it forces.
The server ignores it, and the browser thinks it's new, so it all works out.
Yeah, actually, this is let me do this. I think we have hyperlink. Let me go ahead and do this. So I can put in my address here, and I can say, you know, www.mycoolimage.com $random equals 1, 2, 3. Now this is hard coded here, but if you can generate that each time the link is clicked, which would be, you know, maybe with XBasic or JavaScript, probably JavaScript is your best way to do that, then what will happen is you'll achieve the results that you want. You'll pull the right S3.
You might stick the timestamp at the end of it, for example, because you know that'll always change.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Second. Yep.
Yeah.
And that'll do it. So wonderful. So I don't think we got to everything today. We didn't run out of, which is all right. Go ahead and send any questions that you might have you'd like us to get to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. Dion, thanks very much for presenting
thanks for your
today.
patience.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience and for showing up and asking questions and sticking around till the end. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you at next Wednesday's webinar. Take care and goodbye. And again, we should have last week's webinar posted probably by the end of today, tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.